chair looks okay. My name is Michael Kersey. I made this video to explain the media project I'm kicking off in 2023. If I can, I want to convey a sense of the project's true philosophical origin. And I think the right place to start is by talking about something I fear. I want to live an intentional life. When my life nears its end, I want to be able to say, this is what I did and here's why I did it. I'm reminded of this quote from Frank Herbert's Dune, which is the funeral lament for a person whose life passed them by. Do you wrestle with dreams? Do you contend with shadows? Do you move in a kind of sleep? Time has slipped away. Your life is stolen. You tarried with trifles, victim of your folly. This quote chills me to the bone, and I think some version of this fear stuck in my head from a young age, and I told myself, that's not going to be me. And so the next question was, how do you live an intentional life? How do you spend your few dozen years on things that are really worth doing? And this is an extremely hard question. It's a hard question because the surrounding context that you want to use to answer it, life, is itself extremely confusing. So let's talk about life. The process of literally coming into existence is this insane journey. We're shot into this psychedelic ocean of experience, and we start out with almost no knowledge. You have to distinguish yourself from the environment. You have to learn how to control your body. And it takes years to make enough sense of things to even build the sort of thing that can be called a perspective. And as soon as you figure one thing out, you've got to face another level of the game. And life has probably always been confusing, but I suspect that in our modern world, it's doubly so. The breakdown of local community, atomization, widespread doubt of religion, and of course the terrifying speed of communication and technology. The result is what David Chapman calls the atomized cultural mode, wherein, as he puts it, meanings arrive as bite-sized morsels in a jumbled stream, like sushi flowing past on a conveyor belt, or brilliant shards of colored glass in a kaleidoscope. We've been thrown into the deep end. But back to my story. I wandered. All I really knew was that I was looking for a foundation, but I got the sense after a time that I was surrounded by clues. I found some of these clues by looking into human history and thinking about how that might lead into the future. I found clues in philosophy through the works of the Great Conversation. And I found clues in these old stories I had grown up on: King Arthur, the Greek myths, Ender's Game. And with that, I knew it was time to leave my dread behind and see where these discoveries led me. And I began to realize I'd stumbled into a treasure trove. I could hear these voices from the past which had found their own harmonies in the noise of life, saying, here's what happened. Here's what we've figured out so far. These were our hopes and our dreams. There were thousands of real people who had once lived, whose voices still lingered, telling us what they'd found out about the great mystery. And no one thing solves everything. But the more I listened, the more my own life started seeming less like a confusing mess and more like an opportunity to take part in the greatest story ever told. So even though I'd originally set out to find answers that worked for me, at a certain point I started wondering whether I'd run into something much bigger than that. A foundation which other people could stand on to find answers of their own. Now, of course, people have to find their own sources of meaning in life, but I do think the approach rooted in history and the great works has a few advantages. The first is that it's based on a true story, a history that really happened. And the old books probably aren't right about everything, but that doesn't mean they didn't get close. The second is that no matter your race or gender or age or where you're born, whether you're rich or poor, this common inheritance of stories, memory, and ancient wisdom is yours. The story we're all part of is crazy. More horrible and more beautiful things have happened than we can easily keep in mind. Humanity is brutal, and we're inspired, and we'll break your heart and make it whole again. And the story isn't finished. Which is all to say that I don't think people need to be lectured. They need to be seduced. And my approach to seducing them is called Hallsong Media. Hallsong is an experimental media workshop. It's a launchpad for telling stories about mankind, drawing from sources in history, mythology, and philosophy. We're attempting to narrate what I consider the greatest story out there. For every part of our human inheritance that's been put on film, there's a huge number of unknown, untold, absolutely underrated stories that are dying for powerful adaptations. I'm starting with film, but for me it's bigger than any one medium. I sincerely believe we can build a load-bearing institution to support that essential cultural activity. Storytelling that doesn't distract people from the world, but welcomes them back to it. Maybe we'll win some people over to the real and astounding project of millennia known as civilization. And if all else fails, at least we'll make some cool movies. I've run a large number of media experiments based in some way on this idea. Since the beginning of the pandemic, I cranked out about 40 essays and 100 YouTube videos. A couple I'm proud of. I made Habits. Habits is essentially a music video, technically my first short film, about the tension between our daily behaviors and our more elevated intentions. Courtesy was a brief homage to the work of art historian Kenneth Clark, evoking his ideas on the spirit of civilization. And the woodworking discourses, some of my more recent creations, were experiments in delivering philosophical essays in a format with visual appeal, using woodworking as a metaphor for the themes being discussed. These were cool, but I'm ready to kick it up a notch. In 2023, I want to produce Hallsong's first real fictional short and submit it to film festivals. I want it to be fully scripted, using actors with a complete pre-production through post-production effort. The right funding will be extremely useful for that purpose, in terms of accessing equipment and supporting collaboration. As far as what we'll make, I'm currently very inspired by Milton. I've been playing with this vision of Paradise Lost in monochrome, possibly starting with one of Lucifer's early speeches as he's cast down from heaven. Depending on how that goes, I'll want to move on to making something in feature length. I'll talk about two early challenges we'll face. One big one is that I am self-taught.
I'm somebody who has never learned how to make films.
I have no industry experience. This can be an advantage, the ingenuity that comes from not knowing what you can't do. But on the other hand, it would be great to avoid the costly mistakes that people with a more traditional background will know how to avoid. There's another more unique mistake we might make due to the subject matter I'm interested in. A lot of my favorite sources are these old, dusty, sort of arcane books. And there's a risk of turning that into media that's actually too cerebral. With something like John Milton, for example, the language is dense, and if you want to use the real text, you need to be decisive about making sure the entire work ends up making sense. This is a challenge I'm looking forward to taking on. So that's the story of my life, and the plan for Hallsong Media.